Today I want to talk about a supplement that changed my life, and it's not what you think. It's creatine, and it's for my brain. Now, creatine's been around for decades. In fact, it's one of the most widely studied, most indisputably efficacious, ergogenic supplement for sports performance and strength, and its functions in muscle tissue are fairly well understood. It adds a little bit of intracellular volume via hydration, and then acts as a phosphate donor to create more ATP so that we can do more work. Relatively straightforward. However, in the past decade, fortunately for me, there's been a growing body of evidence to suggest at first, and now for the most part, demonstrate that creatine has many benefits for the brain. Now, benefits are one of those weasel words, like it's good for you or bad for you. It's very non-specific. So I want to talk specifically about what creatine can do for the brain. Before we get into the what, let's talk about the how. So 95% of the creatine in your body is stored in your muscles, but about 5% of it is actually in your noggin. And what can happen during certain periods of high stress, mental fatigue, depression, brain injury like TBI, CTE. So you have to realize, folks, that, when we think of energy utilization, we think of, moving around, exercise, working out. We think of basic life functions, breathing, heartbeat. But the act of you being conscious and remembering and learning skills and all the things that the brain does, that is very energy intensive as well. Now, two of the particularly energy intensive things that the brain has to do that we don't often think about are, number one, being resilient to stress, as in the interpretation of stress. And by stress, I don't just mean physical stress, although I will get to that shortly. I mean mental, emotional stress as well, right? Like you're stressed out about bills, or you got into an argument with your partner or something, right? Life stress, work stress, these kinds of things. Well, how you interpret that has to be managed by the brain too. And that's also very fatiguing. I mean, you know this as a human because we all feel mental fatigue from those things to greater or lesser degrees, depending on the individual. But you can also, in essence, quantify that in terms of substrate utilization, right? The brain, like the rest of the body, runs off glucose and lactate and, ketones, and also has creatine. And when that creatine gets depleted, one of the working theories is that limits the reserve of substrate to kind of fuel certain extra brain functions. And I say extra because these are things that add to our quality of life, but they're not necessary for survival, right? You don't necessarily need to be emotionally stable to survive. For example, your heart will still beat, you'll still be able to respire, you'll still digest food just fine, your muscles will still work. You just might not be enjoying yourself very much doing all of those things. I mean, there's numerous cases throughout history of individuals missing significant portions of their brain and getting on just fine. They just have an altered state of consciousness or an altered kind of day-to-day life afterwards. But in terms of their function as an organism, they're still perfectly good. Like the one example that comes to mind is the case of the individual in the 1900s who got a railway spike through his prefrontal cortex. It actually took a chunk out. And of course, with the medical science at the time, there wasn't much they could do for him except just patch up the hole. And he actually lived a complete life, like went on for years after that without a piece of his prefrontal cortex. And all it did was damage his ability to follow social convention. Like he just ended up being a kind of very rude, straightforward, say whatever was on his mind kind of person, because those limiters that we develop, our ability to kind of interpret cultural mores, if you will, was ripped out of him by that spike. But the rest of him worked just fine, is the point. So back to creatine, what it seems to do is when you have severe cases of anxiety, depression, or in my case, TBI, CTE, traumatic brain injury, or CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, the physical damage to your brain, and by the way, folks, like to use regular terms, I'm talking about a concussion, right? Like you hit your head really hard and now it's bruised. Some part of it is busted in there, right? When you have TBI, CTE, concussion, and there's actual brain damage, the repair of that damage is very energy intensive, just like any repair in the body is. Any kind of immune function, healing from sickness, repairing muscle, all these things are very energy intensive. Well, with depleted creatine stores, you don't have enough energy to kind of optimize brain function that's necessary for life, and then do something extra like fix that part of you that has night terrors, or fix that part of you that just can't get motivated because you have crippling depression. Specific to PTSD, because I'm not a medical professional in any way, shape, or form, particularly in this field, but I can speak to my personal experience. With PTSD, a lot of PTSD symptoms are mental, but oftentimes PTSD symptoms can be caused by actual physical brain damage that just has yet to heal over time. That was certainly the case for me. I mean, full disclosure, and I say this, I'm making this video because I urge not just, people that suffer from depression, anxiety, having trouble sleeping, but especially, athletes, fighters, combat veterans that suffer from PTSD and or traumatic brain injury, CTE, concussion, to look into, don't take my word for it, look into the creatine research. But I can speak to my personal experience, having tried just about everything I could to get back to a normal life after getting out of the Army. I stumbled upon some early creatine research with regards to healing TBI and concussion. So I did the 5-gram standard dose, wasn't really doing anything. So I started doing that twice a day, so that's 10. That wasn't really doing anything. So then I doubled it twice a day. I went to 20 grams. And after a couple weeks of 20 grams a day, it was literally like a switch went off in my head. And I did MRIs beforehand out of necessity during my separation physical. And the change in my brain after just a couple months of the 20 grams of creatine is like night and day. That was several years ago now, and I still to this day take 20 plus grams of creatine daily. And besides just subjectively how much better I feel, objectively, MRI seems to indicate that I've gotten most of my pre-deployment brain function back to normal. I'm still not 100%, but I'm most of the way there. Now, I'm not saying creatine, or specifically 20 grams a day, is the cure-all for depression, anxiety, PTSD, what have you, but it has certainly objectively helped me. And if you or any of your loved ones are suffering from these things, I urge you to consult your physician and do your own research, because creatine might be a game changer for you too. And if you're ever at your wit's end, folks, remember, it takes strength, not weakness, to reach out for help. If you have to, make that phone call and stay in the fight. Thanks for watching.